Thank you so much, Anne. It's really wonderful to be here. Melissa and I have been running around Rome this afternoon, pinching ourselves.
We have.
Not believing that this is real. So welcome, Melissa, to the stage.
Thanks, Michelle. Lovely to be here with you.
As I was hearing the opening address, I thought, what wonderful words. And we're here today to give voice to Sam. And we really want to really listen to his story. So tell us, Melissa, where did it all begin? How did it all start?
So Sam's journey really began when we wanted to fall pregnant. And being older parents, it took a while, and we had to go through in vitro and the whole process. And eventually I just thought, enough, I can't do this. And then Sam came along naturally. And it was such a joy because meeting my husband later in life to actually then fall pregnant was wonderful. And I guess being a parent for the first time and not knowing kind of what it was like to be pregnant, there was still a sense of the unknown, of course, but right from the beginning there was a little bit of unease. And I guess that's where it began in terms of the listening. Because I remember saying to our gynecologist at the time, I really get a sense that something's not right. And he just said, oh, older parents are always a little bit fussy and it'll be fine. And sadly, it wasn't fine. Can you hear better? Okay. All right. I'll stop breathing. So yeah, and it wasn't fine. And really what that journey was Fred and I had our kind of last trip. It was my birthday. It was a friend's wedding in Cape Town, and my husband was running 2 Oceans Half Marathon. And we got to Cape Town, and I started feeling really unwell. And Fred said to me, and he gives his apologies for not being here, thank you, Anne, it's just indigestion, spaghetti bolognese. Well, it wasn't. And they picked up Braxton Hicks, and for the first time noticed that Sam had what appeared to be a halo on his head. And they realized that something was not right. We were cleared to go back to Johannesburg a few days later. Terrible flight. And we literally went straight to the first hospital that Sam was then born into, very prim, at about 28, 29 weeks. They were never sure. And I guess that was kind of the second example of listening, was we arrived at the hospital into the maternity ward, and I remember hearing the nurse kind of in the main lobby area going, I don't know why this mother is here. There's nothing wrong. And had I been, maybe a bit more of a wallflower, I might have said, well, let's go home, because she obviously knows more than me. Anyway, the next morning, I stuck it out and we stayed overnight. And then when the gynae saw me, there were red stickers all over our file. And they saw that the swelling on Sam's head had moved from his head to his tummy. And so our journey began. The nurse that hadn't listened to me had to pay attention because now there were red stickers all over the file. And Sam decided that day was the day to arrive. And Fred had said to me, please not today. I've got a board meeting and a million meetings. And I had to phone him and say, your son wants to say hi. You better get here. And from then on, I always smile at people that have birth plans and home births, and I just think, oh, let it be okay. Because we never got to have that at all. And by emergency Caesar, with 2 gynecologists present, and I remember the anesthesiologist saying, saying, you must be really important. And I said, no, I'm really not. There's obviously something really wrong. And Sam was rushed straight into the NICU. I never really got to see him. I wear contacts, and I really couldn't see him. They kind of said, your baby, and dashed. And we didn't know if he would make it through the night. And from there on, his journey proceeded to undiagnosed, weird diagnoses for 13 and a half months, and being in a hospital where we were not heard, not listened to. And so beautiful to see the slide about the voice and giving voice to everybody in the journey, because that was the key for us. We never felt that we had a voice or a say, despite speaking the same language, having a relatively good education. We just felt unheard. And when Sam eventually passed away, he was born into NICU and never left, except when we transferred him between hospitals from Johannesburg to Cape Town. He'd had countless interventions, over 100 x-rays, MRIs in between, operations that went wrong, transfusions. He was on an ET tube, on a ventilator for 13 and a half months, and he only got a trachea finally at 14 months. And that was when things changed. But sadly, he'd been in hospital for so long that he literally was just rife with nosocomial infections. And gosh, his journey, he was a brave, brave fighter. But he was eventually diagnosed with central cord disease, which is a rare muscle condition, muscle myopathy. But I always wonder how much of that was just a journey going badly wrong, because we never had a team around us who cared and who listened. And when I say didn't care, I think they did. But I think there was so much compassion fatigue and burnout that there was just disconnect and mistrust and so much sadness. And now looking back, I know that had we had a team around us, a palliative team, from the very beginning, I believe that Sam would still be alive. And that's why our heart's passion is around pediatric palliative care and making sure that every doctor, every health professional has a palliative mindset, because I believe a palliative mindset saves lives.
Thank you, Melissa. So Melissa and I met very briefly in the last 48 hours of Sam's life after a very long journey in Johannesburg. And you had a slightly different experience, but you only really discovered palliative care right at the end.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more about how different that journey may have been had palliative care been integrated from the time of diagnosis?
Well, I think for me the key is we would have been listened to, we would have been heard. I remember Fred always saying to me, "What are you saying to the doctors that they shout at you every day? Just don't say anything, don't upset anybody." And I said to him, you know, as a parent, your heart's desire is to care for your child. And I just had questions. And often, you know, when I'm coaching medical students and registrars, I just say to them, remember, our hospital is your norm. It's your place of business. For a parent, it's just terrifying. And when I studied palliative medicine with you, I remember saying to everybody, all of you on your phone with difficult parents, WhatsApp groups, delete it now, because we're just terrified. And I know that had we had a team, a multidisciplinary team, perhaps a tracheostomy would have been a solution way earlier. The port, Sam eventually died of sepsis in his port, would have been explained. You know, there just would have been more communication and somebody that I could actually reach out to. And also having a team of individuals with different knowledge and experience would have been so much easier for us, because it would have made Sam's journey better. Looking back now with the eyes of someone who studied, I realize how much pain he was in and how much suffering there was, which perhaps we weren't so aware of at the time.
Exactly, yeah. And I just wanted to say, Melissa, that even though I was the lecturer and you were the student, we learned a lot from you that year.
Thank you.
And I'll never forget a forum that I posted. I said, how do you deal with difficult parents? And you chided me over using the word difficult parents, and I don't use that word anymore.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about why do we label families as difficult? Are we not listening to them?
Yeah, you know, so often when I hear health professionals, so I predominantly coach in the health profession and support health professionals, burnout, compassion, fatigue, and I think there's that fear of just being real, being human. And I guess, I remember one of the students said to me, we're doing some role playing, and they said, but maybe I should check with the parent what their education level is before I speak to them. I was like, no, just sit down and have a conversation, you know, because then you connect human to human, heart to heart. And when you're doing that, nobody's difficult, because you're actually authentically meeting as human beings first and foremost. Not, you know, you don't have that hierarchical issue or I can't criticize doctors, they know more than I do. Ultimately, you are the parents. And I think that was so hard for me, is I was kind of told to just be in a corner and pay the bills and we'll take care of your child. But as a parent, it's your right to take care of your own child. And we need to empower parents to have that right. I was just, scared to say, actually, just involve me more, because I didn't want to upset the apple cart. I wanted Sam to have care, and for my relationship with the health professional team not to impact on that in a negative way.
And I think sadly, unfortunately, the empowered parent is a parent who gets labelled as the difficult parent.
Exactly.
A parent who's always questioning, who's always asking questions.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's your child, and you have a right to know, and you have a right to participate in decision making.
Absolutely.
And I think, let's face it, we all have access to the internet. Parents Google information. They are going to question, and I think they have the right to do that.
They do, and I think the informed parent is who you're dealing with, and it doesn't matter if you're in deepest, darkest Africa, everybody has a phone. And parents do, because they want to empower themselves to care for their child. So yes.
Yeah. And I think the amazing thing that Melissa and Fred have done since this journey with Sam is to actually go into the world of pediatric palliative care and really use that experience to teach other doctors and also to support other families in what is this really tough and difficult experience. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Footprints for Sam and what you have done?
We can, and maybe we should go into our acronyms as well. I don't know
We'll
what we are with time. But Footprints for Sam is really Sam's legacy. And we're very proud this year, in fact, to support UCT and Michelle's course of postgrad diploma in pediatric palliative medicine with 3 bursaries. So that's really incredible. I think it's the only course in South Africa, South Africa.
Yeah.
So we're very proud to be able to do that. And Footprints for Sam has touched thousands of children's life through transport, through renovations of different wards, a kangaroo mother care ward. We're busy doing a registrar ward. Simple programs like transport of children from home to hospital and clinics, working together with PedsPal there, Wi-Fi, food, advocacy for parents and having a voice, and then very key, emotional support, emotional well-being for health professionals as well as for parents. Kind of in a nutshell what we do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Just to end off our presentation, Melissa and I did a bit of a brainstorming session.
We did.
And we used the acronym, we turned the word listen into an acronym. Let's see if we can get it up.
So maybe just to first meet Sam.
Yes.
So this is Sam. You can see he had the most beautiful blue eyes. And when he got his trachea, you can see in that one picture, he actually was able to pull out his tongue and we could see his face for the first time. I only got to hold Sam after 3 months of him being born. And there's Fred, and he greets you all from South Africa, and it was very sad not to be here. But this little boy was a brave, brave fighter who took everybody into his heart who knew him, because for a long time with the ventilator and the ET tube, you couldn't really see his face, just his eyes. So he learned to speak with his eyes. And we were 2 weeks from coming home when he got sepsis and died. Okay.
And Fred's written a book about him as well.
Yeah, he has.
All right, so this is our LISTEN acronym. And so Melissa worked out the do's and I worked out the do-nots. So the first L, Melissa?
So really we thought, for me, L was learn, and predominantly learn about the person in front of you. So as I referred to earlier, the human being. Who is it who is genuinely sitting in front of you? Put aside your notes, put aside your models, and just sit and listen and learn.
And that leads into my first L, which stands for look away. And I think often as doctors we're very distracted, we're looking at our phone, we're looking at our notes, and we're not really paying attention. And does that give a message that we care? I don't think so.
No. I remember when so we really had 2 kind of parts of our journey. So 13 and a half months in Johannesburg, and then about 3 months in Cape Town. And one of the doctors in Johannesburg, I just said to him, can we just meet and sit down and have a conversation? But he was always bustling through corridors. And I remember the one time I said, so what were the results? And he said, your son has chronic lungs. Now, for someone who'd never been around doctors or hospitals, I just like, was chronic, that sounded terrible. Chronic in English is bad, so this must be really bad. And off he beetled, distracted, and I was just left with this kind of news, not knowing what it meant or how that would impact us. So absolutely, if you're going to have conversations, make time, sit down, and don't just drop news in kind of chunks of puddles that we then drown in along the way.
So moving on to the I in listen.
So interest for me, and again, that word genuine interest, to sit down and really ask the questions. And I think what touched my heart so much as we went through Sam's journey was, as I said, just no say, no voice. And when we eventually brought in a separate team, when we realized we were going absolutely nowhere, we got this team from Cape Town, and it was a nurse and an amazing doctor. And I remember our doctors in Johannesburg saying, "Why are they bringing a nurse?" And I was like, wow, okay, this is an amazing woman who's won a presidential award. And these two incredible women arrived, and I remember the doctor team in Joburg saying to us, "You don't speak to them, you're just the funders, we'll deal with the new team." And one of the doctors was amazing. She just said, "Come, we need to chat." And we sat down with them, and for the first time, somebody genuinely asked about me and who I was and what I needed, and Fred the same. And they were asking so many questions that I thought, oh my goodness, they're doing a genogram. There must be something behind this. And I said, "Why are you asking all these questions?" And they said, "No, it's because we care. And we can't care for your son if we don't know you." And that's when the tears started.
So it's about having curiosity and wanting to know more than just about the patient's family, about their journey and about their story.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that's difficult for us, and we try and maintain our personal barriers, but it made you feel important and it made you feel valued.
It did.
And it acknowledged the difficult journey that you'd had.
Yeah. And they used my name,
Yeah.
which was great.
Sam's mum all the time.
I love being Sam's mom, but I have a name. And it makes a big difference to hear it.
Yeah. All right. And I think the I on the don't side is don't interrupt. And I think often as doctors, we've got our own agendas in the back of our mind, and we're actually listening just for the point of trying to find a gap to put our agenda aside, We're listening with the intent of, what am I going to say next, and what is next on my list? And that must just make you feel like, do you really care?
Exactly. Exactly. No, interrupting is not great. And I think all of it comes together as that sitting down, having that conversation, and being available and not distracted.
So moving on to the S in listen.
So silence is golden. And for me, as a coach, I've had to, over the years, become very comfortable with silence. And I think you have such a lovely story alongside this, but just sit in the silence, because that's when the listening really happens. And to remember that when we communicate, 80% is body language, not the spoken word. And that's what's so key when getting to know the person in front of you. Mind, body, and soul, what's happening in front of you.
So my S is the exact opposite. And the story that you alluded to was of quite a senior pediatric oncologist who I was listening, giving a talk to registrars. And she was talking about that moment after you've broken the bad news, when a silence naturally happens. And she was talking about how uncomfortable that silence is. And she was suggesting to the registrars that a useful strategy is just to fill that silence with words. Just say something for the sake of saying something. Mainly responding from her own discomfort and not actually recognizing how profound a moment that is for parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for us all to be aware what's happening with us.
Exactly.
Because otherwise we judge that person in front of us. And it's important to be reflective.
Yeah. So I think that falls nicely into the T in listen.
Thoughtful. Yeah. How much time do we have? Because I don't want...
You're okay.
Okay. So for me, thoughtfulness is, I think, beautifully described with one of the incidents I have in mind was when Sam could finally wear clothes. And it was so exciting to choose some little outfits for him and put him in these little outfits and be able to bath him and change his nappy remember as a child, kind of parent who's been on this chronic journey, we weren't allowed to do anything for him. So the most important thing for me was to be able to change his nappy. So if I were to come in and a nurse had already done it, it would break my heart, because that was the only time I really got to touch him or do something for him. But I remember one incident where I came in, I had bathed and changed him and put his little baby grow on all the wires and the ventilator. It was always a nightmare. And the doctor came in and literally didn't greet me, didn't greet Sam, didn't greet the nurse, and just ripped open his baby grow, did his examination and left. And we were all just looking at each other. And I just thought, this can't be right. It's not okay. And then when we went to Cape Town, the doctor there was so different. And for the first time, I saw a real multidisciplinary team in action. And she would use that time to undress Sam, to dress him again, to do her examination while talking to him, talking to me. And it was just so personable and so human. And she noticed more in that examination because she was engaged. And even though Sam was a baby, she asked his permission. She said, this is what I'm going to do. And when I speak to parents who've had tumultuous journeys like ours, they all say, just ask permission of the child or the teenager. Just this, we need to put thought and humanity and dignity and hope and just kindness back into the healthcare journey.
Mm-hmm. So my T is exactly the opposite of being thoughtful. It's about hiding behind our technical jargon.
Yeah.
And I think as doctors, that's a place that we feel comfortable. It's a place where we experience that power divide. And we sometimes kind of go into that space without even recognizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, very not thoughtful at all. All right, which leads us into the E, in listen.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the technical jargon. I remember when it was Sam, they used to draw pictures for us. And I always used to think, you can just speak, I understand. And, use these highfalutin words. And just kind of layman terms are important for us, and it helps a lot. Sorry. So empathy. E is for empathy and kindness. And empathy, I think, is best with Brené Brown said, it's communicating that all-important message, that healing message, that we are not alone, that you are not alone. And we felt so alone until we had moved to Cape Town and had this team that came around us, which is what palliative care is all about.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think often as doctors, we tend to be a bit egocentric.
Yeah.
We're thinking about ourselves and how we're going to cope or how to avoid a medico-legal suite. And we're not always empathetic and not always focused on the patient.
Yeah. And that takes time.
Yeah. So the last one, the N?
So that's just non-judgment and not arriving with an agenda. And I think that ties everything so beautifully together, because when we felt judged, that's when the mistrust crept in.
Yeah. And my last N is about being nebulous, and I think sometimes we're very vague, aren't we? And I think being clear is being kind.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to chat.
Thank you.